Today we've got Ahmed Zachary joining us now in the studio. He is the Special Advisor to the President on Power and Infrastructure. He's also a member of the APC's Presidential Campaign Council. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, Chamberlain. Thank you for having me.
Well. Where do we start? Nigerians are not happy with the power situation in the country, either with the electricity tariff, or is it the metering, or the supply? How do we explain this? Or can you tell us now to explain what's going on?
Yeah, I think, Chamberlain, it's important to understand where we came from and where we are and where we need to get to. When the APC administration came in, this sector was comatose. We had ballooning subsidies. 582 billion naira was its peak, and it was approaching 1 trillion naira. No national, scalable metering program. No policy on renewable energy. There were even provisions of the Act on setting up the Rural Electrification Fund. Since 2005, only in 2017, under the Buhari and the APC administration was that set up. And unfortunately, we also had a lot of crony capitalism, where our distribution companies, as well as other assets, were either sold to people that were not capable to manage them, or contractors that couldn't execute them. And where we are after the APC has come to power is really we've stabilized the sector. 8 out of the 11 distribution companies that were sold to incapable investors have been restructured by this administration. We have a national mass metering program with an outlook to eliminate the deficit. We have rural electrification programs. We actually, in December, recorded our largest collections in the history of the Nigerian power sector at 80 billion. And we know we have a candidate in Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu and his running mate Kashim Shettima that understand how to make the power sector continue to improve.
Even if we understand, could be patient about some of, in terms of the policies that are out there, but you also do know, I reckon, of several other voters, thousands of them, who don't understand why they are running currently on estimated billing, even though the mass metering program has said they would have been taken care of by now. How do you explain that to them?
And, I've been here in the past and we've talked about the National Mass Metering Program. It's good to look at where we are. As I said, prior to the National Mass Metering Program, there was no scalable policy on metering in the country. The first phase of the metering program has distributed 1 million meters. We've subsequently concluded the process for another 4 million meters that are all going to local manufacturers. If you go to NEMSA, for instance, more than 20 new local manufacturing companies have been onboarded to assemble those meters locally. President Buhari actually withheld some funding that was available from the World Bank for a short period of time to allow us to restructure the discos. And we have a World Bank facility that will fund another 1.25 million meters. So what I would say, Chamberlain, is we know the gap when we started was about 9.8 million meters. 1 million has been done by the first phase of the National Mass Metering Program. Another 4 million will be done by the second phase, which should commence shortly. And then another 1 million funding has been secured and procurement will commence.
When does the second phase start and end?
Second phase start and end. It should start this first quarter. All the contracts.
March?
Yes, before March.
Oh.
Yeah.
So it explains why people are yet to see the meters, even though there is a mass metering program in place. I mean, people are not wrong to say, look, you've brought up all these policies, but we're yet to feel the effect.
Well, we did 1 million. And the process to ensure that, you know, it's easy to give away revenues and programs that should benefit Nigerians to external parties. The intent was to make sure all of the national mass metering program, new build meters were done in Nigeria. Having 41 companies that will provide thousands of jobs. And in our manifesto, and even recently, Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu in his meeting on the 22nd of December in Lagos stated that we'll do everything possible to make sure Nigerians have power and there'll be no more continuation of estimated billing. But we can only get there if we meter.
60 million Nigerians are currently on the, I think, connected to the national grid. I do not know how many of those people have, you know, are metered with the prepaid meters, because that's essentially what Nigerians are looking forward to. But you say you're able to provide 1 million. You're looking forward to providing another 4 million by the start of this quarter or before the end of this quarter. I'm wondering, because, you know, whether or not to accept, it's a big part of the campaigns that are currently going on. Each of the candidates, you know, have been asked questions as to what they intend to do to resolve the power crisis. There are those who believe that the fact that we have a national grid is one of the problems, that we need to decentralize more. It doesn't look like we've pursued that particular, because it does appear that the APC understands that, but is not willing to pursue it too aggressively. So, for instance, you have the rural electrification project, which has been doing quite a number of, you know, projects. You also have a new policy on on renewable energy. However, there are questions as to, you know, whether or not this national grid system is sustainable, considering how many collapses we have seen under the APC administration.
Yeah. So, very great questions, Mope. A lot to unpack. Let me try to go through them carefully. Firstly, as I said, prior to the APC administration, provisions of the Electric Power Sector Reform Act to create a rural electrification fund for our rural communities were unimplemented for 12 years, from 2005 to 2017. We did that with the understanding that you can't assume that people that are very far from the grid can effectively get power just by waiting for the grid, especially when there's so much technology today with solar panels, mini grids, solar home systems. So we created the Rural Electrification Fund. Additionally, we went out and actually facilitated $550 million of funds through the Africa Development Bank and World Bank. These are one of the most monitored programs in the world with those institutions. And the Nigerian Electrification Program under the REA has actually rolled out about 1 million connections using the NEP proceeds. Why don't you hear about it? Unfortunately, you know, we have a silent majority in this country where people in rural areas, unless you visit them, people don't know what's happening. But if you go around in places I've been to, like Rokota in Niger, if you go to Farundaba in my home state of Jigawa, you'll see populations that never had electricity because of the APC administration now have that power. And in Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu and Kashim Shettima's Renewed Hope Manifesto, our party's manifesto, we're committing to continue that rural electrification expansion. Now, on grid, you're absolutely right. If we know that power is a commodity that is commercial, if you have even 100 gigawatts of capacity, but we can only meter and commercially collect 20 gigawatts of power, you know, the commercial vendors of power will only sell what they can collect. So as we expand our capacity, it is also essential that we do it in a commercially and economically pragmatic way. And that's what the APC has done in stabilizing the sector. And that's what we hope and are working with to continue to do if Nigerians give our candidates the opportunity, which we hope they will.
The question I'm asking is, you seem to have recorded great success in areas where people have not been connected to the national grid.
Yes.
You have made significant progress with the REA, Rural Electrification Agency. Why is it that there's not been that much aggression in also trying to pursue a decentralization, if that is what exactly is delivering more results to the Nigerian people?
So, thank you for the clarification. When we think about the REA and decentralization, to an extent, many of those concepts are synonymous because the mini grids, which essentially could take a 2,000-person cluster, provide them 1 megawatt of power through a power plant that's solar hybrid in that community, an improvement in the local distribution network, and metering is something that we're doing through REA. So for instance, about 100 mini grids have been rolled out between REA's budget, the NEP program, as well as the Rural Electrification Fund. We're also working now to enhance regulation to encourage more interconnected mini grids. So what we call power augmentation. Some communities, even though they're in urban areas, because of our large urban sprawl, if you wait for the grid to help them only, say, oh, we'll only take our rural electrification money out of town, those places, because of our urban sprawl, will continue to struggle. So we're encouraging developers now to put power plants, 500 kilowatts, 1 megawatt, in peri-urban areas. There's a project that's the power minister visited late last year in Zawachiki, in Kano, in Kumbotso local government, where a developer put a power plant there and is connecting 2,000 customers. So they'll get grid power at night, but in the daytime they'll get power from the local power plant. But these programs need to be rapidly expanded. The Rocky Mountain Institute did a project in Mokoloki, I think in Ogun State recently, that also worked on this concept. So I absolutely agree with you. We have to continue to work on the grid. That will help us in our large urban areas. But we must continue, and that's what the APC administration under Asiwaju, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and Kashim Shettima have promised to continue to do, if you look at our Renewed Hope Manifesto, is to rapidly expand renewables and also give our off-grid space additional incentives and breathing room, such that as we're building up capacity on-grid, we're building capacity off-grid as well.
All right, our colleagues in Lagos, I've got some questions for you.
Thank you, Chamberlain. I'm wondering if our guest, Mr. Zakari, would speak to the continued electricity tariff increase, which is making many people uncomfortable. Well, granted that things that are happening with the rural electrification, I mean, is going just as Malcolm noted, and many people are happy about that. However, considering the costs that those in urban Nigeria have to bear in order for them to have electricity, it's most certainly concerning. For instance, there are those, Professor Yemi Oke, for instance, who is a professor of energy law, says that, you know, there are certain procedures that ought to be followed that are not being followed. The MITO, for instance, is supposed to be reviewed and specifically authorized, which is supposed to specifically authorize tariff increase after following laid down rules, including wide consultations. But guess what? That does not happen, according to him. So if those are not done and tariff increase happens and people are not comfortable, how then can we have small businesses enjoy the businesses that they're supposed to do and deliver services to Nigerians at good enough prices, affordable prices?
That's a great question. But I also think that in looking at our nation, we must be a nation of laws, and we must follow our rules. And those rules are laid down to ensure equity and fairness. It is not it's not news that every 6 months the law requires the electricity regulator to review the multitude of tariffs across the nation. And that is not done to be punitive. It's done to be fair, because essentially some communities will have factors that cause their tariff to reduce. Some may marginally increase, but you also have the providers of that electricity that have some of their factors changing. When you say tariff, it's a bit of a misnomer in today's world because we have multiple discos, multiple tariff bands, and there's no one resolution. There are locations that have experienced tariff reduction. Some have experienced tariff increase. And the government actually continues to subsidize citizens in bands C, D, and E, which is where most of our areas that don't receive power and are less affluent are. So I think some people have tried to weaponize tariff politically. We must have a electricity sector that's built on commercial pragmatism, and we must use our limited resources to subsidize the citizens that need that subsidy. And we continue to do that. This year we've spent 120 billion naira, sorry, last year, subsidizing our lower bands. But targeted subsidies are better than giving a subsidy to somebody in Metama or Ikoyi with 20 ACs that can pay.
Well, just as you have rightly pointed out, a particular part of Abuja and the former commercial capital, weaponizing tariff may be debatable. But I'd like to look at another area, which is discos. And at the start of your commentary, you lauded the restructuring of the discos as a plus for the administration in terms of stabilizing the sector. But the discos don't think the same way. They talk about inadequate data at the onset of privatization, government's failure to fulfill the commitment of subsidies of 100 billion naira, and of course the debt owed also by the ministries and agencies, 100 billion naira, and the debt owed is a lot of money, too much in fact to take in their strides, don't you think, Mr. Zachary?
No, and I really like coming to Sunrise because the level of research on these questions is always deep. What I would say is there's always development and evolution, which is why we need to check in and discuss with the public continuously through programs such as this. I'd say that many of those factors that you've talked about have merit. But we've done a lot, as I've said, in the rescue mission that the Buhari or Simbajo administration and the APC has done on the sector. For one, if you look into our regulations, there's actually an offset regulation that was released by the regulator that is allowing discos to claw back almost 100 billion naira of MDA debt from federal agencies that have not paid them. And that's ongoing now. And the Ministry of Finance and the Budget Office are funding that repayment. Additionally, if you discuss with discos today, with the fact that there are reviews and the restructuring, you'll find that some of our disco performances, if you talk to citizens in Kano, citizens in Kaduna, Ibadan, Benin, Port Harcourt, with the discos that have been restructured, they're having better service delivery, and the health of those discos commercially is improving. For example, look at Kaduna Disco. In January of last year, they were barely doing 1.8 billion naira with significant gaps in paying their dues to the market. So we could not pay Gencos for the energy that they were receiving. as of December, they almost did 3 billion naira. The Yola Disco privatization has been extremely successful. It was a disco that was doing 600 to 700 million naira. And even with the power challenges in Maiduguri, that disco did about 1.3 billion naira in December. We can't have a sector that is not economically sustainable and expect it to grow. And what this administration has done and what the APC promises to continue to do through Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu and Kashim Shettima is build a market based on economic pragmatism that is sustainable and that focuses subsidies and help to citizens that need it, while those that can pay. As I said, metering is big on our candidates' agenda. Rural electrification is big on our candidates' agenda. Since the Buhari or Simbaju administration has stabilized the sector, what we expect is the Tinubu-Shettima administration to really come and accelerate and make it fly.
All right, many will look forward to that one, that breakdown as well, so they can be on the same page with your candidate and his manifesto on that particular aspect of power provision. He talked about 24-hour uninterrupted power supply when he wins. All right. Well, we'll have to let it go at this point. Ahmed Zakari, essay to the president on power and infrastructure, also a member of the APC's Presidential Campaign Council.